through things like COVID, we saw supply chain shocks that really showed how weak this whole system is today. Space is now a theater of war. Your AI is only as useful as your lived experience. So learn the fundamentals and then get smart using AI tools.
This is the Future of the Future show. I am your host, Mateo Berbejicio. The US used to be the unquestioned leader of the industrialized world. It stood at the forefront of hard, deep technology, the kind that creates real, physical breakthroughs, reshapes industries, strengthens national security, and pushes society forward. But is that still true today? If not, what happened? And more importantly, what needs to change for the US to reclaim its position as the global leader in deep tech innovation? Joining me today to answer these questions is Jeff Crusey, General Partner at IceNine, an investment firm focused on the next generation of industrial, aerospace, defense, and frontier technologies. Jeff has spent years investing in founders tackling some of the hardest technical and industrial problems of our time, with a strong focus on rebuilding critical capabilities and supporting technologies that have long-term strategic importance for the future of the United States. In this conversation, we will explore reindustrialization, the future of aerospace and defense, the impact of AI hype on deep tech investing, and the skills that will define the next generation of builders and innovators. Stay tuned for an exciting and incredibly relevant conversation. Jeff, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Mateo, for having me.
Jeff, in your opinion, why is the US so far behind on industrialization, and why does that matter?
I think it goes back to some of my more formative years in VC when I first got into VC around 2008. Uh, the US had gone through an economic downturn with the housing market crash, and there's a lot of federal funding that was going towards things like the energy transition and some of these more fundamental technology areas. And unfortunately, what happened, in my view, was the entire VC ecosystem was more or less focused on software as a service, and they weren't really focused on energy tech. They weren't really focused on AI at that point. And so a lot of these in space and defense wasn't even part of the conversation at that point in time in VC. Mark Andreessen said it himself, software was eating the world, and that's where VC focused. But they overlooked these critical areas. At the same time, they were outsourcing a lot of manufacturing overseas to areas like China. And a lot of tribal knowledge and experience and understanding and how to build things was lost over the last few decades. And part of the reason the US needs to reindustrialize is because they have lost control of their own destinies and that they're not doing their own manufacturing anymore. And through things like COVID, we saw supply chain shocks that really showed how weak this whole system is today and how exposed the US is to dependencies on foreign nations that might not be their closest allies or friends in a lot of ways. And so to mitigate those dependencies and risks, the US really does need to start building again. I think the opposite direction would be to end up something like the UK, that's largely a rent-seeking economy based on things like fintech and doesn't really manufacture or produce anything anymore. I don't think the US wants to end up like that.
What changes are needed to enable reindustrialization in the US? What is the role of VCs in this reindustrialization? And specifically, how do you think about IceNine in this process?
Yeah. So in terms of what the US needs to do in terms of reindustrialization, there's one core aspect, which is a country's basic competitiveness is the cost of electricity and how plentiful and easily you can access it. That drives things like we're seeing in the AI industry right now with infrastructure being built out. I think there are other things that the US needs to do that aren't necessarily head on, but are important to making sure that ecosystem is resilient. Palmer Luckey was talking about the need for confidential patents to protect national security innovation and things like that. We need banks that aren't going to go bankrupt in the middle of a technology cycle. We can't have a Silicon Valley bank if we're in conflict with other countries, because if a bank goes bankrupt, we can't expose our defense to that. So there's a lot of other like little things we need to do in the ecosystem beyond just the innovation itself, making it a better ecosystem. But then, it's a race really at the end of the day with AI and robotics and pushing the envelope in areas like space and defense. But then I would even say that has second order effects in areas like healthcare and whatnot. Um, so there's a lot to do. And the role for the VCs are really to underwrite, the technology that's going to move the needle for the US and allied nations, and do that as early as possible and then accelerate them, because it's not just about having the right company, it's about having the right company at the right time and accelerating it into the value that it can achieve as quickly as possible. Because it's not as if our competitors aren't doing that on the other side. So it's really about speed and capital and supporting those businesses. And then the role that IceNine plays is, I think we try and take it a step further. There are a lot of VCs, nice folks, but their main value are other intros to VCs, which that has value. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to point fingers in any bad way at anyone. But we really do have a lot of industry experience and technical know-how that we can support these companies with. So that means we expose them to our embedded networks, across the US government, within in leadership and industries, and key protagonists that might want to be on their team or they might want to bring on. Um, and then, we can get into the weeds on their technical development. I mean, there are times when we've had to tell space companies like, don't use that propulsion. We know it's going to fail. We've seen it. Here's all the evidence. And, delivering some of that experience really does mainly help them avoid mistakes we've made in the past. And hopefully it helps them move a lot faster.
So you said the cost of electricity, the cost of energy is very, very important. What excites you the most about what's going on in that field? There's nuclear fusion, which promises a world, sort of a Star Trek world. There's solar. There's so many things going on right now. What excites you, and where do you think the U.S. should point towards?
Absolutely. So early in my career, I was focused on energy tech. I was at DTE Energy, a utility in Detroit, Michigan. And one of the things that made logical sense to me in a very practical way was nuclear fusion or fission. It's very clean. Um, it's safe. However, we had some incidences in the past, like Fukushima, that I think painted it in the wrong context.
Right.
And and it gave people a lot of fear, and so they wanted to continue to heavily regulate and basically slow that industry down quite significantly. When I was at DTE, it would take 10 to 15 years just to get licensed to turn
Right.
a reactor on. That's like most startups can't survive that kind of a time frame. What gives me hope today is the current administration is really going out of their way to cut red tape and get reactors tested and turned on a lot faster than that 10 to 15 year time frame, which I
Right.
think is makes the most sense, because it is clean, it's plentiful, we can put it anywhere, it's base load, it's not intermittent, and it solves a lot of the problems we have today with cost of energy because it is very, very cheap as well. So we kind of have, it has the most benefits to it, but policy and sort of public understanding have kept it away from that. I think if I kind of take one step further beyond fission, I think we're not that far away from fusion actually. I've spent a lot of my career looking at fusion, going back to 2008. And I saw a lot of endemic issues with each of the different approaches to fusion. And it wasn't until a couple years ago when I helped incubate a team that's doing a new approach to fusion that I thought there was a realistic chance that we could have grid parity fusion energy in the not too distant within our lifetime. And I would say
Right.
even within the decade. And so I'm feeling pretty confident about that. And that has even more benefits because hopefully it's even cleaner, even cheaper, and even more distributable.
Exciting times to be alive. What are the key focus areas for regaining an edge in the aerospace and defense industry, and why do you think this is important?
Yeah, so going back years, I was talking about the growing surface area of attack for space,
Hmm.
which meant we had more and more government satellites up there. We had more and more commercial satellites. We started to see the emergence of commercial space companies like Planet, Black Sky, Maxar. Well, it's not called Maxar anymore, but I think you get my point. There's more and more unprotected assets on orbit, while competitors like China and Russia have dogfighting satellites, direct energy weapons. I mean, as recently as a few days ago, there was a Russian satellite approaching IceEye satellites, a Finnish company that does synthetic aperture radar imaging, and so it's a real threat on orbit because that's a lot of infrastructure that now sits up there that is exposed.
Yeah.
Um, I had talked a long time about the need for an Andorra of space because in it we saw it firsthand with the invasion of Ukraine. The first things the Russians attacked were GPS, geospatial satellites, and communication satellites, and that should have been a very loud warning to the rest of the world that space is now a theater of war. Where war is fought through, it is actually fought on orbit now. And
Right.
that's why I
Right.
backed companies like Chernobyl.
Um, let's talk a little bit about AI, right? There's a lot of AI hype, and it's impacting everyone. How does the current AI hype impact the tech investment, or the deep tech investment area? And is it driving valuable funds away from what matters, or is it giving you opportunities because people are not paying attention? How is it? How does it work?
Well, I think it's sort of a philosophical topic up for debate. It really depends on what the individual investor's outlook is on AI.
Right.
So if an individual investor's outlook on AI is that it's going to be the end all be all, we're going to achieve AGI, then it would make sense for them to spend every penny they had investing in that direction.
Yep.
If I believe that, that's what I would be doing. Um, However, I don't personally believe that. I don't think LLMs are going to achieve AGI. I think it's a lookalike to AGI, and I don't think it's that great today. Like it can do some nice things. I don't think it's that great right now. I think we still have a long way to go, and I'm not convinced LLMs are the end all be all model either. We've had subsequent iterations of the internet. I think we'll have subsequent iterations of AI.
Right.
Um, my biggest worry though for AI is that just like everyone thought the internet was going to be this free and open place to exchange ideas and concepts and whatnot, it was eventually gamed on us with ads. And I think
Mm.
we should be kind of eyes wide open about that with AI, that we'll be getting engineered answers they want us to see, not what we necessarily actually want to see or should
Yeah.
be seeing.
Yep. Yep. Do you think there's a bubble about to burst? Don't know. Might. What are your thoughts there?
I don't it's hard. It's a really hard one to tell because there's so many different points of value aggregation within AI right now. You can look at the chips, you can look at the data centers, you can look at the models themselves, you can look at the companies that are wrapping the models.
Yeah.
You can look at all these different points, and it's kind of hard to tell because on one end, these big model companies are achieving incredible levels of revenue very, very rapidly, which gives me indication that like this might not necessarily be a bubble. This could be here to last, and we're just sort of in the early innings today.
Yeah.
And if everybody's right on that, we're close to being we're getting close to AGI, then yes, this behavior makes sense in a lot of ways. So, do I think we're in a bubble? I mean, valuations are frothy. I don't think anybody will argue that. But are we heading in the right direction? Yes, I do think we are.
Got it. Got it. Um, Jeff, what is your story and why does deep tech matter so much to you?
Yeah. I grew up an athlete. I played a lot of sports. I've always been very, very competitive. And I kind of carried that into VC as well. So going back to 2008, I saw a lot of VCs wanting to invest in areas I don't think they really understood, like solar
Mm.
panels. And this is while China was waging economic warfare. And I kind of raised my hand and said, like, hey, we've got a bigger problem here than just this one investment. But nobody really wanted to hear that at that point in time. It was kind of a conspiracy theorist like position to take at that point in time. But my concern was for American competitiveness because I knew even at that age, like if we just shipped all this manufacturing over,
Mm.
we were literally shipping it to our competitors and they were going to take
Right.
advantage of that long term. And I saw this programmatic across a lot of different industries. And so really my concern became more about Western competitiveness than it was for any kind of specific deal. And that's why I needed to get broader into VC so I could figure out how to come back and revitalize these industries at some point, because I knew we would need to. And that's why IceNine exists. We've been around doing this long before it was cool. We've got the experience in the industry to see these kinds of issues long before others do, and maneuver more strategically, because we don't have the ability to throw $100 million at a startup right now. We're a tiny fund, so we have to be really surgical about how we move with our founders.
How do you balance how deep do you get with each of the companies that you're working with? Does it depend on their team? Does it depend on their needs? Are you always drawn to, because you love this so much, to get more into the weeds, or you try to stay out of it?
Yeah, I really subscribe to the philosophy of lead, follow, or get out of the way. And I never want to insert myself unnecessarily, because I never want to slow down founders. So it's always a balance, right? It's different for every team, like how in the weeds I get with them. For example, with Castilian, there was very little I was actually going to do to support their team beyond my check and helping them raise some money and that side of things. Um, you know, on the technical side, sales side, operation side, everything. They were a complete package as a team. So yeah, I would have just gotten in their way. So that was an instance where I stepped back and didn't want to insert myself. But there are some companies where they're first time founders, they've never done this before. Maybe they're very technical, they're not very commercially oriented. And so we do have to handhold a little bit more. So we might help them build their team. We might help them flush out their roadmap, the technical roadmap. We help them develop those relationships with investors long before they're asking them for money, things like that. Um, I would say in terms of like what does it look like on the balance of the portfolio? I'd say about a quarter of the time we're in the weeds, like either incubating or like heavily handholding, and we're happy for it. That's why we're here. That's what we want
Right.
to do and deliver for founders.
Jeff, one last question to you. Everyone is very anxious about the job market, mostly for juniors, right? For grads. Um,
Mhm.
what skills do you think matter more for the workplace of the future? What will be your message to them?
Um, I think it's easy to get scared by AI and thinking that, somebody can easily learn whatever you're trying to learn and race past you. I don't believe that at all. Like, I think if anything, it's causing a lot of people to skip fundamental learning and
Right.
just get to an end answer that might not be complete or well thought through. So I think the real durable advantage is to be that person that gets to the fundamental understanding of physics, the fundamental understanding of electrical engineering, and have that basic skill set, which will let you outcompete once you have the same AI tools as everyone else.
Right.
So I think, my philosophy on it is your AI is only as useful as your lived experience. So learn the fundamentals and then get smart using AI tools.
I love it. Jeff, thank you so much. I appreciate it. This has been an amazing conversation. I love following you on LinkedIn, on your media, everything that you're doing, and every time you show up on a podcast or you send out a newsletter or an article. So I'm very happy that I had you today on my show.
Oh, thank you. It's been a lot of fun.